In this era of globalization, many countries have achieved progress in various aspects of economy, social, technology, and civilization. However, the progress enjoyed by this developed country is not easy to develop and solve the problems have occurred for a very long time, and that means is to be income inequality. Before that, we need to acknowledge the groups that receive income distributions in Malaysia. There are three main income classifications in Malaysia, namely B40, M40, and T20. From Malay Mail article by Ida Lim on Friday 10 July 2020, the highlights of the article was income inequality in Malaysia widened even while the median household income rose to 5,873 ringgit in 2019, referring to the article The Income Inequality in Malaysia.
One of the main factors affecting the rising cost of living in Malaysia is inflation. Inflation is the rate at which the price of goods and services increases and causes consumer purchasing power to decrease. Inflation occurs when the demand for goods is higher than the available supply, therefore causing an increase in the price of goods. Besides, inflation also results from the rising production costs like higher prices for raw material or energy. When the cost of production increases, such as an increase in the price of raw material or labor, the price of goods and services also increase. This means that people need to spend more money to purchase the same goods or services they previously could afford, and making it harder for individuals, especially those who fix or low incomes, to maintain their standard of living. For example, in November 2024, Malaysia overall inflation rates increased by 1.8%. According to the Department of Statistics Malaysia (DOSM), the increase was largely due to the high cost of food and beverage. For example, in November 2023, the average price of chicken in Peninsular Malaysia will be around 8 ringgit and 46 per kilogram. But in November 2024, the average price of chicken increased to 9 ringgit and 69 per kilogram. This shows a price increase of 1 ringgit and 23 per kilogram, or about 14.5% during the period. The increase in the price of the chickens also contributed to the increase in food inflation in Malaysia. Therefore, high inflation is clearly the main factor that causes the rising cost of living in Malaysia, putting pressure on low-income groups and increasing difficulties in managing daily expenses. The weak value of the currency, ringgit depreciations in Malaysia, can affect the rising cost of living in Malaysia because it has a direct impact on the price of goods and services purchased by the people. When the Malaysian ringgit falls against foreign currencies, it increases the cost of importing goods such as food, raw material, and other products. Since many import goods and raw materials are increased in price, this will cause producers and traders to increase the selling price to consumers. With a weak currency, import goods will become more expensive. For example, if the ringgit depreciates against the US dollar, the price of the import goods such as food, vehicle, and electronic charge in foreign currency will be increased when converted to ringgit. The increase in the price of these goods will cause the cost of living to increase because people will have to pay more for these goods. In addition, transportation costs can also increase. Most of the fuel used for transportation, such as oil, is also imported and sold in foreign currency. If the value of the currency is weak, the price of oil will increase, and this will cause the cost of transporting goods to increase as well. Overall, a weak currency affects almost all aspects of daily life, from food, clothing, housing to transportation, all of which will become more expensive for rising costs of living in Malaysia. Lastly, housing and rental costs are one of the major factors affecting the rising cost of living in Malaysia because it uses most of the household expenses, especially in urban areas. In Malaysia, house prices in urban areas such as Kuala Lumpur, Penang, and Johor Bahru keep increasing over time. Factors such as high demand, lack of land for new development, and rising costs of building materials cause house prices to be high. As house prices rise, more Malaysians can afford to buy a house, especially the young and households with low or moderate incomes. Rent is also a big burden for many families, especially in urban areas. With high demand for housing, landlords and developers often raise rents. This increase in rent causes many families to spend more than their incomes on housing and lack of money for other needs. In addition, home maintenance costs, including utility bills such as water, electricity, and internet, can also be very high. Housing that is more modern and complete with various facilities requires higher maintenance costs. This adds to the burden of the cost of living, especially for young people living in areas with a high cost of living. As a result of high house prices in urban areas, many are forced to move to rural areas to get more affordable houses. Although house prices are lower in the countryside, the cost of transport and other necessities such as access to the public services may be higher. That makes living costs in the city and the countryside not very different. Overall, high housing and rental costs lead to an increase in household monthly expenses, reducing the purchasing power of Malaysians and increasing their cost of living. So, it's true that rising costs of living in Malaysia affected by factors such as inflation, weak currency, and the cost of housing and rental. Inflation causes the price of goods and services to rise, making everyday life more expensive. The fall in value of the ringgit adds to the burden on the people by increasing the price of import goods, including raw material and foods. Meanwhile, the rising cost of housing and rent burden households, especially in urban areas, reducing purchasing power and adding to financial pressure for most Malaysians. The combination of these factors challenges the viability of many families, especially low and middle income groups, in managing their daily expenses.
The rising cost of living is a complex issue involving three main interrelated challenges. The first one is increase in the price of goods and services. The second one is unemployment rates, and the last one is psychological and social stress faced by society. The rise in the price of goods and services is the primary causes, driven by factors such as global inflation, global economic instability, rising costs of raw material and logistics, and the imbalance between supply and demand, especially after the pandemic. As a result, the purchasing power of the community has decreased, while basic necessities such as food, housing, and education have become increasingly expensive. In addition, the high unemployment rate has further worsened the cost of living situation. The lack of job opportunities in certain sectors, the mismatch between graduate skill and the needs of the job market, as well as the development of automation and digitalization, are the main causes of unemployment. Consequently, many individuals have lost their source of income and are unable to meet basic needs, further widening the economic gap between the rich and the poor. Psychological and social stress is also a side effect that cannot be ignored in this issue. Financial burden have caused many individuals to experience mental health problems such as depression and anxiety. From a social perspective, life pressure can lead to tension within family institutions and in increased crime due to the struggle of life.
The first implication of rising costs is the structure of society will be affected. With the increase in the cost of living, the structure of society in Malaysia is expected to undergo significant change. The economic pressure that occur can cause a more pronounced stratification between the rich and the poor. Low-income households may have difficulty meeting basic needs, which will lead to social dissatisfaction and even potential tension.
Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad Chief Economist Dr. Muhammad Afzanizam Abdul Rashid has emphasized that policy changes such as the rationalization of fuel subsidies and the expansion of the scope of the Sale and Service Tax (SST) are intended to improve the government finance, but they are the main cause of the increase in the cost of living and will also worsen this inequality by having a disproportionate effect to low-income groups. The second implication of rising costs is there are other social problems such as rising crime rates. Pressure related to the issue of the rising of living in Malaysia can contribute to an increase in crime rates. For example, when an individual faces financial difficulties, some of them may be forced to resort to illegal means or vice versa as a means of survival. Malaysia Reserve has noted that the prevailing economic pressure can lead to social tension and also instability. Significant increase in the cost of living can exacerbate social tension and also inequality. Next, the implication of rising costs is increase in the price of essential items. The price of essential goods has experienced a very significant increase due to factors such as inflation and also adjustment of subsidies. The inflation rate predicted in 2025 is expected to increase between 3% to 3.5% compared to the previous forecast of 2.5% to 3.0%. Following the plan to rationalize the RON 95 petrol subsidy that will come into force in 2025 has affected the price of food and other necessities. Budget 2025 aims to address this challenge by increasing the minimum wage and also providing specific subsidies. Last but not least, the implication of rising costs is burdened with heavy debts. As the cost of living increase, more and more households are expected to incur high levels of debt in order to maintain their standard of life. Increased expense for housing, food, and also healthcare can cause families to rely on loans or credit cards, and this has resulted in a cycle of debt that is difficult to break.
There are two solutions obtained from the factor that caused the increase in the cost of living in Malaysia. This solution is based on Islamic perspective. So the first one is solution tackling inflation. The next one is addressing the weak value of the ringgit. The last one is combating high housing and rental costs. So tackling inflation reduces our purchasing power and causes price to rise. Islam teach us to maintain fairness in trade and avoid exploitation. So first, we must adhere to ethical economic principle by avoiding riba usury. So Islam prohibits interest-based transaction as the cause inequality and economic instability. Instead, Islamic banking based on fair profit sharing models like Mudarabah and Musyakara can help stabilize our economy. Last one is the principle of Hisbah in Islam ensure ethical business practice. Governments can in place price control on essential goods, ensuring pricing and preventing exploitation. The last one is combating high housing and rental costs. Housing is a basic human need. Islam offers solutions to ensure housing affordability and equity. Islam resources the housing of wealth and properties. Policies are encouraging to productive as of vigilance can ease housing shortage and reduce costs. Islamic financing models like Musyarakah Mutanakisa diminishing partnership provide an alternative to conventional mortgage, offering fair and accessible ownership opportunity.
The government should be proactive in fostering the issue of income inequality by helping its citizens who are in need, especially during the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. For this reason, one of the initiatives that the government should consider is implementing minimum wage policy to reduce the gap of income inequality among Malaysians. The main idea of these policies is raising wages, which will improve employees' quality of life. In return, it puts productivity in the long run since workers can spend their money on education or healthcare. The implementation of minimum wage policy is expected to decrease income inequality because raising the minimum would attempt to increase salary of low-paid workers, thereby reducing inequality in earnings. Moreover, increasing minimum wage also lessens a form of expenses which will lessen the responsibility for the rich people, while this can reduce the income gap between the rich and the poor. As the world enters a new phase of economic recovery following the COVID-19 crisis, government should be explore a longer-term solution to their wage and assistance programs, not only to sustain financial and budgetary sustainability, but also to avoid further market distortion. Long-term, durable and adequate social protection programs are required to survive future shocks. Employer and community-driven initiatives might be supplemented by state-sponsored social protection programs to achieve this. These are some of the lessons we should have learned for the potential global economic catastrophe in the previous years, addressing income inequality year after year.